The Unfolding Canvas, An Evolutionary Journey of Human Artistic Expression from Primordial Markings to Algorithmic Gods Part 1, The Genesis of Expression, Art in Prehistory and Early Civilizations 1. Whispers from the Caves, The Dawn of Artistic Consciousness. The story of human artistic expression begins not in grand galleries or with celebrated masters, but in the dim recesses of ancient caves and windswept rock shelters, where the first tentative marks of conscious creativity were laid down. These primordial expressions offer a profound glimpse into the dawning of human symbolic thought and the innate impulse to interpret and engage with the surrounding world. The emergence of artistic behavior. The earliest undisputed art is associated with Homo sapiens of the Aurignacian archaeological culture in the Upper Paleolithic, around 40,000 years ago. However, a growing body of evidence suggests that the preference for aesthetics and symbolic behavior has much deeper roots, extending into the Middle Paleolithic, 100,000 to 50,000 years ago, and possibly even earlier with other hominin species. Engravings on ochre, the fashioning of beads from shells, and abstract markings on cave walls by Neanderthals, dated to as early as 64,000 to 75,000 years ago, challenge a purely Homo sapiens-centric view of art's origins. Astonishingly, an engraved shell attributed to Homo erectus on Java, dated to approximately 500,000 years ago, pushes the timeline for symbolic expression even further back, suggesting that the cognitive seeds of art were sown long before the emergence of anatomically modern humans. African sites such as the Blombos Cave, and Apollo 11 Cave in southern Africa, and Wonderwerk Cave, have yielded engraved ochre, painted stones, and shell beads dating from 75,000 to 100,000 BCE, positioning Africa as a crucial cradle for these early artistic stirrings. These findings indicate that the first attempts by humans to interpret their environment and communicate ideas through images were not sudden events but part of a gradual unfolding of cognitive capabilities. The very definition of art becomes fluid when examining these ancient expressions. They represent a nascent stage of symbolic communication where the aesthetic was likely inseparable from functional, social, and spiritual imperatives. These early manifestations were not art for art's sake, but rather fundamental tools for navigating and understanding a complex world. Materials, techniques, and discoveries. The materials available to these early creators were those offered by their immediate environment. Natural pigments, primarily red and yellow ochres, iron oxides, black charcoal, and manganese oxides, were ground and mixed with binders such as water, animal fat, or plant juices to create paints. These pigments were applied to cave walls using various techniques, directly with fingers or hands, with rudimentary brushes made from plants or animal hair, or by blowing the pigment through reeds, or directly from the mouth. Engravings, or petroglyphs, were created by incising or carving designs into rock surfaces using sharp stone tools like flint. Beyond cave walls, portable art was fashioned from animal bones, ivory, such as mammoth tusks, stone, and clay. The discovery and mastery of these materials and techniques were, in themselves, significant technological advancements, reflecting early human ingenuity and resourcefulness. The choice of materials also inherently influenced the durability, scale, and stylistic characteristics of the art produced. Societal functions, ritual, magic, communication, and social cohesion. Prehistoric art was far from mere decoration. It was deeply embedded in the fabric of early human societies, serving a multitude of functions crucial for survival and social cohesion. Many artistic manifestations are believed to have been linked to magical or religious practices, born from a context of survival and ritual. The location of many cave paintings, often in deep, inaccessible chambers like those at Lascaux in France and Altamira in Spain, suggests their use in shamanic ceremonies, hunting magic aimed at ensuring successful hunts, or initiation rites. The depiction of animals, which dominates much Paleolithic cave art, likely held symbolic power, perhaps representing totemic animals, spirit guides, or desired hunting success. Figures like the sorcerer in France or the lion man in Germany hint at complex belief systems involving mythological beings and ancestors. Beyond the spiritual, art served vital social functions. It helped reinforce group identities and may have reflected social hierarchies. Shared artistic styles and motifs could have acted as markers of group affiliation or territorial boundaries, uniting communities. The collaborative creation of large-scale art, such as extensive cave paintings or megalithic monuments in later prehistoric periods, would have strengthened social bonds and fostered a sense of shared purpose. Furthermore, art served as a means of communication and knowledge transmission, conveying practical information about the natural world, hunting techniques, or social norms to subsequent generations. In a world without writing, visual representation was a primary method for recording beliefs, experiences, and collective memory. The prehistoric artist, role and context of display. The notion of a specialized artist in the modern sense is anachronistic when applied to prehistoric societies. The creators of these early works were likely individuals who held specific roles within their communities, such as shamans, elders, or those with particular manual skills. Their work was not typically an act of individual self-expression but a service to the community's spiritual and social needs. Some scholars suggest that shamans, perhaps in trance states, created images in the depths of caves as part of rituals to connect with the spirit world. The context of display was intrinsically linked to the art's function. Parietal art, found on cave walls and rock shelters, served public or ritualistic communal purposes. The deep, hidden locations of many cave paintings suggest they were intended for specific, perhaps initiated, audiences rather than general viewing. In contrast, portable art, such as Venus figurines, small female statuettes with exaggerated features, possibly related to fertility cults or goddess worship, or decorated tools and ornaments, could be carried by individuals or small groups, serving more personal or mobile functions. The ubiquitous nature of these figurines across vast geographical areas indicates a widespread human attraction to art and possibly shared religious or symbolic ideas. As societies transitioned into the Neolithic period, with the advent of permanent settlements, new contexts for display emerged, including pottery for domestic use and megalithic architecture for communal or ceremonial purposes. Cognitive evolution and the impulse to create. The emergence and evolution of artistic expression are inextricably linked to the development of complex cognitive abilities within the human lineage. The capacity for symbolic thought, the ability to let one thing stand for another, is a fundamental prerequisite for art. Increased capacities for abstract thinking, imagination, and sophisticated visual communication allowed early humans to express their ideas, beliefs, and experiences through graphic representations. Creating art, particularly representational art that depicts something from the mind's eye, rather than merely modifying an existing form, signifies a major cognitive leap. The journey from simple, possibly accidental marks, or non-representational patterns, which some researchers suggest may be linked to entoptic phenomena, visual effects generated by the eye and brain itself, perhaps during altered states of consciousness, to the sophisticated and naturalistic animal depictions found in caves like Chauvet, dating back over 30,000 years, implies a significant evolution in cognitive processing and observational skills. The creation of art separate from the body, such as cave paintings or sculptures, indicates a fully modern human cognition by the Upper Paleolithic. This impulse to create may have served various evolutionary purposes, including strengthening social bonds, transmitting knowledge, and facilitating ritual practices that help communities cope with an uncertain world. Thus, art is not merely a cultural byproduct, but a profound indicator of humanity's evolving mind and its unique capacity to shape and interpret reality through symbols. Our understanding of this deep past is itself an evolving narrative, continually reshaped by new archaeological discoveries and a critical reevaluation of historical biases and interpretation. The very definition of what counts as art has been subject to cultural biases, often Eurocentric in focus, and the accidents of preservation mean that what survives, particularly in the protective environment of caves, heavily influences the story we can reconstruct about these earliest artistic endeavors. 2. Art in the cradle of civilization, Mesopotamia, Egypt, Indus Valley, and early China. The transition from nomadic hunter-gatherer lifestyles to settled agricultural societies during the Neolithic Revolution laid the groundwork for the rise of the world's first civilizations. These complex societies, emerging in fertile river valleys such as Mesopotamia, Egypt, the Indus Valley, and early China, developed new forms of artistic expression that reflected their sophisticated social structures, religious beliefs, and political organizations. Art in these early civilizations became a powerful tool for codifying beliefs, legitimizing power, and expressing collective identity. New forms and materials in settled societies. The stability afforded by agriculture and permanent settlements allowed for the development of artistic forms that were larger, more durable, and required greater specialization of labor. Monumental architecture, such as the ziggurats of Mesopotamia, massive step temples, the pyramids and temples of Egypt, and the well-planned cities of the Indus Valley civilization, for example, Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro with their granaries and public baths, became defining features. These structures were often adorned with monumental sculptures, reliefs, and paintings. Pottery, invented in the Neolithic period, became highly sophisticated, with carefully crafted and decorated vessels serving both utilitarian and ritual purposes. Mesopotamian pottery, for instance, was often handmade initially, later becoming wheel-thrown, and decorated with geometric patterns or figurative scenes. The Indus Valley civilization produced distinctive red and black pottery, often with intricate designs. The advent of metalworking during the Bronze Age and later the Iron Age introduced new media and techniques, leading to an increase in stylistic diversity and the creation of objects with purely aesthetic or symbolic functions. Mesopotamians excelled in sculpture in stone and clay, and created cylinder seals, small figures, and reliefs. Egyptian artists utilized a vast array of materials including granite, basalt, limestone, wood, gold, copper, and semi-precious stones like lapis lazuli and turquoise, as well as faience, a glazed ceramic, and glass. The Indus Valley civilization produced remarkable small-scale sculptures in stone, like the Priest King, bronze, the Dancing Girl, and terracotta, along with intricately carved steatite seals. Early Chinese dynasties, particularly the Shang and Zhou, are renowned for their mastery of bronze casting, creating elaborate ritual vessels. For example, Bing, Zun, Gu, adorned with intricate motifs like the Teoti animal mask design, and for their sophisticated jade carvings. These material and technological advancements dramatically expanded the possibilities for artistic expression. Societal functions, codifying religion, power, and social order. In these emerging states, art played a crucial role in establishing and maintaining social order, religious beliefs, and political authority. Monumental art and architecture served as potent displays of the power of rulers and the gods they represented. In Egypt, art was primarily functional, deeply intertwined with religion and ideology, aiming to portray an idealized world to maintain ma'at, order and justice. The pharaoh was depicted according to strict conventions, often in colossal statues and reliefs, to emphasize his divine status and role as upholder of order. Egyptian tomb art, including intricate paintings, reliefs, and grave goods, was essential for assuring the deceased's safe passage and comfortable existence in the afterlife. Mesopotamian art similarly served religious and political ends. Cylinder seals, used to mark ownership and authorize documents, often depicted deities, worshippers, and mythological scenes, reflecting religious beliefs and social hierarchies. Stone stelae, like the Stele of the Vultures or the Coat of Hammurabi, commemorated military victories and proclaimed laws, visually reinforcing the king's authority and the divine sanction of his rule. The art of the Assyrian Empire, with its extensive palace reliefs depicting royal hunts, battles, and tribute bearers, was a clear assertion of imperial might. In the Indus Valley Civilization, while the precise functions of many artifacts remained debated due to the undeciphered script, seals with animal motifs and human-like figures likely had roles in trade, administration, and possibly religious practices. Figurines, such as those interpreted as mother goddesses or the priest-king, suggest religious beliefs and social roles. The organized layout of their cities and structures like the Great Bath of Mohenjo-Daro also point to a society with established social and ritual practices reflected in their material culture. Early Chinese art, particularly the bronze ritual vessels of the Shang and Zhou dynasties, was integral to statecraft and religious ceremonies, especially ancestor worship. These vessels were used in sacrifices to heaven and ancestral spirits, believed to influence the living. The iconography on these bronzes, such as the Teoti, dragons, and birds, carried symbolic meanings related to power, cosmology, and communication with the spirit world. Jade objects also played crucial roles in rituals, burials, and as symbols of status. The impact of urbanization, state formation, and writing. The development of urban centers and centralized states was a primary driver for new forms and functions of art. These complex societies required systems for administration, record-keeping, and the promulgation of laws and ideologies, all of which found expression in art and architecture. The invention of writing systems, cuneiform in Mesopotamia and hieroglyphs in Egypt, was a revolutionary technological and cultural advancement that had a profound impact on art. Writing allowed for the explicit labeling of figures and events and visual narratives, the recording of historical accounts on monuments, the inscription of laws such as the Code of Hammurabi on its famous stele, and the creation of literary works that could inspire or be integrated with visual art, for example, the Epic of Gilgamesh. In Mesopotamia, cuneiform inscriptions often accompanied monumental architecture, detailing royal achievements or invoking divine protection. Egyptian hieroglyphs were an integral part of tomb and temple decoration, conveying religious spells, narratives, and royal titulary. This fusion of text and image imbued art with new layers of meaning, specificity, and authority, transforming it into a more potent tool for historical documentation, legal codification, and religious instruction. State formation provided the organizational capacity and resources necessary for large-scale artistic projects, from temple complexes to lavish royal tombs, which in turn served to reinforce the state's power and legitimacy. The artist's role, status, and training. With the rise of civilizations and the increasing demand for specialized goods, a class of artisans and craftspeople emerged. These individuals, while often remaining anonymous to history, possessed high levels of technical skill and were typically employed by the state, temples, or wealthy elites. In Egypt, artists and craftsmen worked within a highly organized system, often in royal or temple workshops. Their work was guided by strict artistic conventions and canons, ensuring consistency and adherence to religious and political ideologies. Individuality in the modern sense was not prized. Rather, the accurate execution of established forms was paramount. The creation of art was often a collective endeavor. Mesopotamian artists also worked under patronage, producing sculptures, reliefs, and cylinder seals that reflected regional styles and evolving iconographies. The quality of craftsmanship in surviving artifacts, from intricate seals to monumental reliefs, indicates a high degree of specialization and training. Indus Valley artists demonstrated remarkable skill in a variety of crafts, including metal casting, stone carving, pottery, and beadmaking. Evidence of workshops and craft specialization has been found in urban centers like Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro. While their individual status is unknown, the sophistication of their products suggests they were valued members of society. In early China, the production of intricate bronze ritual vessels and jade carvings required exceptional skill and specialized knowledge. The complex piece mold casting technique used for bronzes, for example, implies organized workshops in a tradition of passed-down expertise. Artisans often crafted items for the ruling elite and for ritual purposes, indicating their integral role in the state and religious life. The training of these early artists and craftsmen likely occurred through apprenticeship systems within workshops, where skills were passed down from master to student over generations. While the concept of the individual artistic genius as celebrated in later periods had not yet emerged, the technical mastery and aesthetic sophistication evident in the art of these early civilizations testify to the dedication and skill of their creators. Standardization and artistic canon. Early civilizations frequently developed distinct artistic canons, codified systems of rules, conventions, preferred motifs, and standardized forms of representation. These canons serve to ensure consistency in artistic production, facilitate clear communication of religious and political messages across diverse populations, and maintain cultural identity over long periods. Egyptian art is a prime example, with its highly recognizable conventions for depicting the human figure, profile head, frontal torso, striding legs, its use of hierarchical scale, larger figures indicating greater importance, and its consistent iconographic system for gods and symbols. These conventions remained remarkably stable for millennia. Mesopotamian art, while showing more regional variation and stylistic evolution over time, also employed recurring motifs. For example, the Master of Animals, Tree of Life, Winged Genie, and standardized ways of depicting rulers, deities, and narrative scenes, particularly in reliefs and cylinder seals. The Indus Valley Civilization, known for its standardized bricks used in construction and the consistent style of its seals, also suggests a degree of artistic canonization, likely related to administrative and trade purposes, as well as shared cultural symbols. In early China, the forms and decorative motifs of bronze ritual vessels and jade objects were subject to established conventions that evolved over the Shang and Zhou dynasties but maintained a distinct cultural coherence. The Taiyuan mask, for example, is a recurring and highly recognizable motif with specific symbolic associations. Later, even the advent of printing in China contributed to the standardization of religious canons through the accurate reproduction of texts and images. This adherence to artistic canons reflects the organized nature of these early states and their use of art as a deliberate tool for social cohesion, ideological reinforcement, and the transmission of cultural memory. While such standardization ensured clarity and continuity, it also, by its nature, placed certain constraints on individual artistic expression, prioritizing collective values and established norms over radical innovation. Nevertheless, within these canons, there was often room for subtle evolution, regional adaptation, and the display of exceptional craftsmanship, indicating a dynamic interplay between tradition and creativity. The very establishment of these canons, however, marks a significant departure from the more fluid and varied expressions of prehistoric art, signaling art's new role in the structured life of urban civilizations. Part 2, Codification and Canonization, from Classical Antiquity to the Medieval World. 3. The ideals of form, art in classical Greece and Rome. The artistic achievements of classical Greece and Rome represent a pivotal epoch in the evolution of Western art, establishing aesthetic ideals and forms that would resonate through subsequent centuries. This era witnessed a profound exploration of the human form, the development of sophisticated artistic techniques, and the integration of art into the core of civic, religious, and private life, all underpinned by evolving philosophical thought. Characteristics: pursuit of idealism, harmony, and naturalism. Greek art, particularly during its classical period, roughly 480–323 BCE, is renowned for its pursuit of idealism, harmony, and an increasingly naturalistic, yet perfected, representation of the human body. Artists strove to capture not just physical likeness, but an idealized beauty, often based on mathematical principles of proportion, such as the golden ratio, to achieve a sense of balance and order. Sculptors meticulously studied human anatomy, frequently using athletes as models, to portray gods and heroes as figures of supreme physical perfection and serene grandeur. This resulted in works that conveyed a sense of vitality, permanence, and clarity. Roman art, while initially heavily influenced by Greek models, leading to the saying, Greece, conquered, led her conqueror captive, developed its own distinct characteristics. While Romans adopted the Greek pursuit of idealized forms, especially in depictions of gods, and in imperial propaganda designed to elevate emperors to near divine status, they also cultivated a strong tradition of realism, particularly in portraiture. This veristic style, prominent during the Republic, emphasized lifelike, often unidealized features, capturing wrinkles, receding hairlines, and other individual imperfections to convey experience, gravitas, seriousness of purpose, and republican virtues. Throughout the imperial period, Roman portraiture often oscillated between these veristic and classicizing, idealizing modes, depending on the political messages the ruling emperor wished to convey. Thus, the classical world offered a complex interplay between the ideal and the real, the divine and the human. Materials and technological advancements. The artistic ambitions of Greece and Rome were realized through significant advancements in materials and technology. Greek artists achieved unparalleled mastery in marble carving, creating sculptures with subtle modulations of form and lifelike drapery, and in bronze casting, which allowed for more dynamic and complex poses. Terracotta was also widely used for smaller sculptures and pottery, which itself became a sophisticated art form with distinct painted styles like black figure and red figure vase painting. The Romans were remarkable engineers and innovators in building materials. Their development and widespread use of concrete, along with their mastery of the arch, vault, and dome, constituted an architectural revolution. These innovations enabled the construction of monumental structures with vast interior spaces, such as the Pantheon and the Colosseum, as well as extensive infrastructure like aqueducts and bridges. The Romans also made extensive use of fired brick and tile, and developed strong, water-resistant cement. While Greek architecture, with its column and lintel system, was a refinement of earlier traditions, Roman construction techniques represented a significant technological leap, profoundly shaping the urban landscape of their empire. Furthermore, the mastery of iron smelting became widespread during the Greco-Roman period, impacting toolmaking and construction. Societal functions, mythology, civic identity, imperial power, domestic adornment. Art in the classical world was not confined to elite circles but permeated public and private life, serving a wide range of societal functions. In Greece, art was central to religious practice, with temples like the Parthenon housing magnificent cult statues of deities, such as Phidias's colossal gold and the real Athena. Sculpture adorned temple pediments and friezes, depicting mythological scenes and religious processions. Art also celebrated civic ideals. Statues of victorious athletes, statesmen, and personifications of virtues reinforced the values of the polis, city-state. Roman art similarly served to reinforce state power and ideology. Imperial portraits, disseminated throughout the empire in the form of statues and on coins, glorified the emperor and promoted a sense of unity and loyalty. Triumphal arches and columns, adorned with historical reliefs, commemorated military victories and imperial achievements. Beyond public display, art played a significant role in Roman domestic life. Wealthy Romans decorated their villas with elaborate frescoes, mosaics, and sculptures. These often depicted mythological scenes, landscapes, still lifes, and portraits, reflecting the owner's cultural sophistication, education, particularly their knowledge of Greek culture, and social status. Gardens, too, became an art form, carefully designed and adorned with sculptures, functioning as spaces for leisure and philosophical contemplation. Influence of philosophy on artistic themes and representation. The intellectual currents of the classical world profoundly shaped its artistic output. Greek philosophy, particularly the ideas of Plato and Aristotle, influenced the aesthetic ideals of harmony, proportion, and mimesis, the imitation of reality. Plato's concept of ideal forms, for instance, can be seen as analogous to the sculptor's pursuit of perfected human figures. Aristotle, while also valuing mimesis, saw art as having a cathartic and moral educational function. In Rome, philosophical schools adapted from Greek thought continued to exert influence. Stoicism, with its emphasis on virtue, virtus, reason, duty, and emotional self-control, likely resonated with Roman republican values and found expression in the gravitas conveyed by veristic portraiture. The depiction of emperors as steadfast and authoritative figures also aligns with Stoic ideals of leadership. Epicureanism, which advocated the pursuit of pleasure understood as tranquility and freedom from pain and a retreat from worldly anxieties, may have influenced the themes and atmosphere of art found in Roman villas, such as idyllic garden scenes, depictions of leisure, and still life celebrating the bounty of nature. These domestic artworks often aim to create an environment of peace and refined enjoyment, consistent with Epicurean ideals of a pleasant life. The choice of mythological scenes or landscapes in villa decoration could serve as visual aids for contemplation and escape from the pressures of public life. The very design of Roman pleasure gardens, as spaces for serene retreat and the enjoyment of nature's beauty, aligns with Epicurean values. The pursuit of an ideal in classical art was itself a culturally constructed notion, evolving significantly from Greek philosophical abstraction to Roman pragmatic application. While Greek artists, influenced by thinkers like Plato, sought a universal, perfected beauty often tied to divine or heroic subjects, Roman art adapted these ideals for more varied purposes. Republican Rome, for example, championed veristic portraiture, where unflattering realism conveyed the value traits of experience and gravitas. Later, Imperial Rome masterfully blended idealism with realism in portraits of emperors, using classical forms to link rulers to gods or revered predecessors, thereby legitimizing their authority and projecting specific political messages, such as Augustus's image conveying peace and stability. This demonstrates how artistic choices actively reflect and shape cultural ideals, rather than merely mirroring a monolithic concept of perfection. Technological advancements in materials and construction were not merely passive facilitators but active shapers of classical aesthetics and the scale of artistic ambition. The Greek mastery of marble allowed for the subtle rendering of idealized anatomy and drapery, while Roman innovations in concrete, exemplified by the Pantheon's dome, enabled unprecedented architectural forms in vast, unencumbered interior spaces. This Roman architectural revolution directly birthed new aesthetic possibilities and societal impacts, underscoring a form of technological determinism in the arts. The durability of these materials has also profoundly influenced which artworks have survived, thereby shaping our historical understanding of the period. Furthermore, classical art functioned dynamically across multiple societal levels. In public arenas, it served as a powerful medium for mass communication, reinforcing civic and religious identity in Greece and disseminating imperial ideology across the vast Roman Empire through widely distributed statues and coinage. Concurrently, within the private sphere, classical art enabled the elite to fashion and display their personal and cultural identities. Wealthy Romans adorned their villas with frescoes and sculptures that signaled their education, status, and appreciation for Hellenic culture, often choosing themes of leisure and philosophical retreat that resonated with Epicurean ideals. The adaptability of artistic forms and themes to these diverse contexts, from grand public monuments to intimate domestic settings, highlights the multifaceted role of art in classical society. The artist's status and the beginnings of art theory. While many artists in the classical world remained anonymous artisans, the period saw the rise of celebrated individuals, particularly in Greece. Sculptors like Phidias, Praxiteles, and Lysippos, and painters like Apelles, though his works are lost, achieved considerable fame and recognition for their skill and innovation. Their names were recorded, and their works were sought after. The Romans, great admirers and collectors of Greek art, often commissioned copies of Greek masterpieces or employed Greek artists. This era also marks the nascent stages of art theory and art history as disciplines. Writers like Pliny the Elder, in his Natural History, compiled information about artists and artworks, providing invaluable historical accounts. Vitruvius's treatise The Architecture recodified principles of Roman architecture, discussing proportion, materials, and design. These texts indicate a growing intellectual engagement with art, moving beyond mere craftsmanship to consider its principles, history, and impact. The establishment of artistic schools, such as the one at Sicyon in Greece, which emphasized a cumulative knowledge of art, laid some of the earliest foundations for formal art historical study. This period, therefore, witnessed the initial steps in elevating the artist from an anonymous craftsman to a recognized, skilled creator, and the very first attempts to systematically document and theorize about artistic practice. 4. Art in the Age of Faith, the Medieval Tapestry. The millennium spanning roughly from the decline of the Roman Empire in the West, c. 4th-5th century CE, to the dawn of the Renaissance, c. 14th century, is often termed the medieval period. This era was characterized by profound social, political, and religious transformations, and its artistic expressions were extraordinarily diverse, reflecting a complex interplay of surviving classical traditions, new spiritual imperatives, and distinct regional cultures. Across Europe and the expanding Islamic world, art became a powerful medium for expressing faith, consolidating power, and transmitting cultural values. A millennium of diverse expressions, Byzantine, Islamic, Romanesque, and Gothic traditions. The medieval artistic landscape was far from uniform, encompassing several major, often overlapping and interacting, traditions. * Byzantine art, flourishing in the Eastern Roman Byzantine Empire with its capital in Constantinople. This tradition inherited and transformed Roman artistic forms. It is renowned for its majestic icons, luminous mosaics often with gold backgrounds, and hieratic, stylized depictions of religious figures. Byzantine art aimed to convey the transcendent glory of the Christian faith and the divine authority of the emperor. Key characteristics include elongated figures, frontal poses, a lack of naturalistic perspective, and a profound sense of spiritual awe. Imperial patronage heavily influenced its themes and styles, blending Roman imperial grandeur with Eastern Christian spirituality. The Hagia Sophia in Constantinople stands as a testament to its architectural and decorative achievements. Islamic art, Golden Age, Umayyad, Abbasid, Fatimid, etc. Emerging from the 7th century onwards, Islamic art developed a unique visual language across a vast territory stretching from Spain to India. Characterized by intricate geometric patterns, flowing arabesques, and the sophisticated art of calligraphy, especially of the Quran, it found expression in diverse media including ceramics, textiles, metalwork, glass, and manuscript illumination. While figural representation was often avoided in strictly religious contexts like mosques due to concerns about idolatry, it flourished in secular art, scientific manuscripts, and poetic illustrations. Islamic architecture, with its distinctive mosques, palaces, and madrasas, often featured elaborate tillwork, stucco carving, and innovative structural forms. The art of this period was influenced by Roman, Byzantine, Sasanian Persian, and Central Asian traditions, which were absorbed and reinterpreted into a new synthesis. Romanesque art, c. 1000 to 1200 CE, dominating Western Europe in the High Middle Ages, Romanesque art and architecture are characterized by their solidity and strength. Churches were massive stone structures with thick walls, rounded arches, barrel vaults, and relatively small windows, creating a sense of fortress-like security and solemnity. This period saw a significant revival of monumental stone sculpture, particularly in the decoration of church portals, tympanums depicting scenes like the Last Judgment, and column capitals, which served as sermons in stone for a largely illiterate populace. Illuminated manuscripts, metalwork, and frescoes also flourished. Romanesque art drew on Roman precedents, Byzantine influences, and the energetic decorative traditions of barbarian art, for example, insular art. Gothic art, c. 1150 to 1500 CE, evolving from Romanesque architecture in northern France, the Gothic style aimed for greater height, light, and spiritual transcendence. Key architectural innovations included the pointed arch, rib vault, and flying buttress, which allowed for thinner walls and vast expanses of stained glass windows. These windows, filled with vibrant colored glass depicting biblical narratives and sayings, bathed church interiors in ethereal light, symbolizing the divine. Gothic sculpture gradually became more naturalistic and expressive than its Romanesque predecessor, with figures appearing more human and emotionally engaged. The style spread throughout Europe, with regional variations, and also encompassed panel painting, illuminated manuscripts, and tapestries. These diverse traditions were not isolated. There was considerable cultural exchange, such as the influence of Islamic science, philosophy, and decorative arts on medieval Europe, often transmitted through Spain and Sicily. Dominance of religious themes and functions. Throughout the medieval period, religion was the paramount force shaping art. In Christian Europe, the Catholic Church was the primary patron, and art served didactic, devotional, and liturgical purposes. Paintings, sculptures, stained glass, and manuscripts illustrated biblical stories, the lives of saints, and theological concepts, making the tenets of faith accessible to all, including the illiterate majority. Art was intended to inspire awe, piety, and contemplation, and to adorn sacred spaces, enhancing the experience of worship. Similarly, in the Islamic world, art was deeply intertwined with religious life. The meticulous calligraphy of the Quran was considered the highest art form, reflecting the sacredness of the divine word. Mosques were adorned with geometric patterns and arabesques designed to evoke a sense of infinite divine presence, avoiding direct figural representation in sacred contexts. Even secular Islamic art often incorporated religious inscriptions or alluded to spiritual concepts, blurring the lines between the sacred and the profane. This profound religious orientation meant that artistic forms and innovations were often directly driven by theological imperatives and liturgical needs. For instance, the Christian emphasis on light as a symbol of divinity fueled the development of stained glass technology in Gothic cathedrals, transforming church interiors into numinous spaces. In Islam, the aniconic tradition in many religious settings spurred an extraordinary flourishing of non-figural art forms like calligraphy and complex geometric designs, which themselves carried deep symbolic and spiritual meaning. Architectural forms were fundamentally shaped by worship practices. The basilica plan adapted for Christian churches to accommodate congregations and processional rituals, and the mosque plan with its prayer hall oriented towards the Qibla direction of Mecca and featuring a mihrab niche indicating the Qibla for Islamic prayer. Thus, religious dogma and liturgical requirements often acted as a sacred blueprint, dictating not just subject matter but actively shaping the materials, techniques, and stylistic evolution of medieval art. Materials and technological innovations. The medieval period witnessed significant developments in artistic materials and techniques, often tailored to specific art forms and cultural contexts. Manuscript illumination. This was a highly refined art form in both Christian Europe and the Islamic world. Scribes and illuminators meticulously copied texts and adorned them with intricate paintings, miniatures, decorative borders, and gold leaf on parchment or vellum, and later paper. These lavish books preserved sacred texts, classical knowledge, and literary works, transforming them into objects of great beauty and spiritual value. In Europe, monasteries were the primary centers for manuscript production in the early Middle Ages, with bookmaking later becoming a commercial enterprise in cities. Islamic manuscript painting, particularly in Persian, Ottoman, and Mughal traditions, often illustrated historical chronicles, scientific treatises, and epic poetry with vibrant, detailed miniatures. Stained glass, a defining feature of Gothic architecture, stained glass windows were a major technological and artistic innovation. Craftsmen assembled pieces of colored glass, held together by lead cams, to create vast luminous narratives that filled cathedrals with divine light. The technology for producing and working with colored glass became increasingly sophisticated, allowing for larger and more complex designs, such as the famous rose windows of cathedrals like Chartres. Mosaics, the tradition of mosaic art, inherited from Rome, reached its zenith in the Byzantine Empire, where vast surfaces of churches like Hagia Sophia and San Vitale in Ravenna were covered with shimmering tesserae of glass, stone, and gold, depicting emperors, empresses, Christ, and saints in majestic hieratic compositions. Early Islamic architecture, such as the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem and the Great Mosque of Damascus, also employed intricate mosaics, often featuring vegetal and geometric motifs, demonstrating the continuity and adaptation of this technique. Asterisk calligraphy. In the Islamic world, calligraphy was elevated to the highest art form, intrinsically linked to the divine word of the Quran. Various scripts, such as Kufik, Musk, and Thuluth, were developed and perfected, each with its own aesthetic rules and applications. Calligraphers underwent rigorous training, often through a master-apprentice system culminating in an ijaza, certificate of mastery, which ensured the faithful transmission of skill and knowledge across generations. Calligraphy adorned not only manuscripts but also architecture, textiles, ceramics, and metalwork. The artist and craftsman, guilds, workshops, patronage, and anonymity versus recognition. The status of the medieval artist was generally that of a skilled artisan or craftsman. Most worked anonymously, especially in the earlier centuries, as part of collective workshops, often attached to monasteries, cathedrals, or royal courts. The focus was typically on the sacred or functional purpose of the work rather than on individual artistic expression or fame. In Western Europe, particularly from the High Middle Ages onward, the guild system became a dominant organizational structure for craftsmen, including painters, sculptors, masons, and goldsmiths. Guilds regulated the training of artists through a structured apprenticeship system. Apprentice, journeyman, master, set standards for materials and quality, controlled prices, and provided mutual aid and social support for their members. To become a master, an artisan typically had to produce a masterpiece demonstrating their skill. While guilds ensured a high level of craftsmanship and maintained traditions, their regulatory nature could also sometimes limit radical innovation or stylistic experimentation, as adherence to established norms was often prioritized. The rise of cities and a money-based economy in the Gothic period led to more artists being known by name, and some, like the Romanesque goldsmith Nicholas of Verdun, achieved wider recognition even earlier. In the Islamic world, craft production was also highly organized, often centered in urban marketplaces where specific crafts had their designated areas. Early Islamic states supervised markets and crafts through officials like the Mu'tazib. Later, craft associations emerged that were sometimes linked with Sufi mystical orders or Futuwa chivalric youth organizations, emphasizing ethical conduct and communal bonds alongside technical skill. The master-apprentice relationship was crucial for the transmission of knowledge, particularly in highly specialized arts like calligraphy, where the ijaza system formalized the lineage of teaching and mastery. Patronage throughout the medieval period came predominantly from religious institutions, the church in Europe, waqf endowments in the Islamic world, and secular rulers, emperors, kings, caliphs, sultans, and wealthy nobles. These patrons commissioned works to glorify God, assert their own power and piety, and adorn sacred and secular spaces. The medieval artist, therefore, was largely perceived as a skilled artisan, a conduit for expressing established religious or imperial truths through learned techniques and accepted iconographies. Their creativity was demonstrated in the masterful execution and subtle variation within these traditions, rather than in radical personal invention or self-expression as would be prized in the Renaissance and subsequent eras. The increasing number of named artists in the later Gothic period, however, signals the very beginning of a shift in this perception, a precursor to the Renaissance elevation of the artist's status. Guilds and workshops, while fostering high standards and enabling complex productions like cathedrals, also inherently favored continuity and incremental evolution. Radical stylistic shifts often correlated with broader societal transformations or the demands of powerful, innovative patrons. Contexts of display, sacred spaces and secular power. The primary venues for artistic display during the Middle Ages were religious edifices, cathedrals, churches, monasteries, and mosques. Art within these spaces served to instruct the congregation, inspire devotion, and create an atmosphere conducive to worship and contemplation of the divine. Sculptures on portals, stained glass windows, frescoes, mosaics, and altarpieces all contributed to this immersive religious experience. Secular power was also expressed through art displayed in palaces, castles, and imperial halls. Tapestries, murals, and precious objects in gold and silver demonstrated the wealth, status, and authority of rulers and nobles. Illuminated manuscripts, while often religious in content, were also luxury items that served as symbols of piety and learning for their wealthy owners, whether clerical or lay. Portable objects such as reliquaries, liturgical vessels, and icons played important roles in private devotion, church ritual, and public processions. The context of display was thus overwhelmingly public or institutional, tied to the central pillars of medieval society, faith and power. Part 3. The Rise of the Artist in the Modern Gaze, Renaissance to the 19th Century. The period from the 14th to the 19th century witnessed a profound transformation in the nature, function, and perception of art in the Western world. sparked by the intellectual and cultural ferment of the Renaissance, which rediscovered and reinterpreted classical antiquity. Art and artists embarked on a journey that saw the elevation of the artist from craftsman to intellectual genius, the development of revolutionary techniques for representing reality, and the gradual emergence of a more complex art world with new systems of patronage, markets, and criticism. This era laid the foundations for modern conceptions of art and the artist. 5. Rebirth and Revolution, the Renaissance, c. 14th-16th centuries. The Renaissance, meaning rebirth, was a transformative period in European history, marking a transition from the Middle Ages to modernity. Originating in Italy, particularly Florence, in the 14th century and spreading across Europe through the 16th century, it was characterized by a fervent renewed interest in the art, literature, and philosophy of classical antiquity. This revival, coupled with significant intellectual and artistic innovations, fundamentally reshaped the visual arts and the role of the artist in society. Humanism and the revival of classical ideals. At the heart of the Renaissance was humanism, an intellectual movement that emphasized human potential, reason, and individual achievement, shifting focus from the predominantly theological concerns of the Middle Ages. Humanist scholars and artists looked to ancient Greece and Rome as models of excellence, studying classical texts, sculptures, and architecture. This engagement with the Greco-Roman past was not merely imitative but involved a critical reinterpretation and adaptation of classical principles to contemporary Christian society. Artists began to depict mythological subjects alongside traditional religious themes, and the classical orders of architecture, Doric, Ionic, Corinthian, were revived and incorporated into new buildings. Figures like Leon Battista Alberti, himself a humanist scholar, architect, and art theorist, championed the idea that art was an intellectual discipline, akin to the liberal arts, rather than mere manual craft. This philosophical underpinning provided a crucial framework for the artistic developments of the era, encouraging artists to see themselves as thinkers and innovators. Key innovations, transforming visual representation. The Renaissance was a period of extraordinary technical and conceptual breakthroughs that revolutionized how reality was depicted. Linear perspective, perhaps the most iconic invention of the Renaissance, linear perspective provided a mathematical system for creating a convincing illusion of three-dimensional space and depth on a two-dimensional surface. Architect Filippo Brunelleschi is credited with its early demonstrations around 1415, and Leon Battista Alberti codified its principles in his influential treatise De Pictura on painting in 1435. This innovation allowed artists to construct rational, measurable, and seemingly realistic pictorial spaces, fundamentally changing the nature of painting and relief sculpture. Oil painting techniques. While oil-based paints had been used earlier, it was during the Renaissance, particularly in Northern Europe with artists like Jan van Eyck, that oil painting techniques were refined and popularized. Van Eyck's mastery of layering translucent glazes of oil paint achieved unprecedented luminosity, rich colors, subtle gradations of tone, and meticulous detail. This technique gradually spread to Italy, where artists like Leonardo da Vinci adapted it, allowing for greater blending and atmospheric effects compared to the previously dominant tempera medium. Sfumato and chiaroscuro, artists developed sophisticated techniques for modeling form and creating atmosphere. Sfumato, famously perfected by Leonardo da Vinci, involves soft, hazy blending of tones and outlines, creating subtle transitions between light and shadow and imbuing figures with a lifelike presence and psychological depth. Chiaroscuro, the dramatic use of strong contrasts between light and dark, was employed by many Renaissance artists to enhance the three-dimensionality of figures and create a sense of volume and drama. Anatomical accuracy, driven by a humanistic interest in the natural world and the human body, Renaissance artists pursued a deeper understanding of anatomy. Figures like Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo undertook direct observation, studied classical sculptures, and even engaged in human dissection to learn the structure of muscles and bones. This scientific approach led to more anatomically correct, dynamic, and emotionally expressive figural representations. These interdependent technological and theoretical innovations were not isolated advancements but part of a broader quest for naturalism and expressive power. They provided artists with the tools to represent the world and human experience with a new level of verisimilitude and psychological insight, marking a definitive break from medieval artistic conventions. The emergence of the artistic genius, changing social status of artists. One of the most profound shifts during the Renaissance was the transformation in the perception and social status of the artist. Previously viewed largely as skilled craftsmen within a guild system, artists began to be recognized as intellectuals, innovators, and creative geniuses. Leon Battista Alberti, in De Pictura, argued that painting was a liberal art, requiring knowledge of mathematics, geometry, poetry, and rhetoric, thus elevating the painter above the level of a mere artisan. Giorgio Vasari's Lives de più eccellenti pittori, scultori, ed architettori, Lives of the Most Excellent Painters, Sculptors, and Architects, first published in 1550, played a seminal role in cementing this new status. Vasari's biographical accounts of Italian artists from Cimabue to his contemporary Michelangelo not only provided a historical framework for Italian art, effectively inventing the discipline of art history and popularizing the term Renaissance, Rinascita, but also constructed the narrative of the artist as a divinely inspired individual, possessing unique talent and vision. Michelangelo, in particular, was presented as the epitome of this artistic genius. This concept of the Renaissance genius, while powerfully influential, was a humanist construct that also carried inherent biases. It largely celebrated male artists from specific regions, primarily Tuscany, often overlooking or downplaying the contributions of women and artists from other areas, and established a canon that has been subject to critical reevaluation in modern art history. Nevertheless, this elevation in status granted artists greater creative autonomy, intellectual recognition, and social prestige than they had ever previously enjoyed. Masters of the High Renaissance, c. 1495 to 1527, Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, Raphael. The High Renaissance, a brief but extraordinarily fertile period, witnessed the culmination of Renaissance artistic ideals in the works of three towering figures. Leonardo da Vinci, 1452 to 1519, the quintessential Renaissance man. Leonardo was a painter, sculptor, architect, musician, scientist, inventor, and more. His artistic innovations included the perfection of sfumato, profound psychological depth in his portraits, for example, Mona Lisa, and complex, dynamic compositions, for example, The Last Supper. His notebooks reveal extensive anatomical and scientific studies that informed his art. Michelangelo Buonarroti, 1475 to 1564, primarily a sculptor, but also a masterful painter and architect. Michelangelo's work is characterized by its profound understanding of human anatomy, immense emotional power, and heroic grandeur. His iconic sculptures like David and Peter, the monumental frescoes of the Sistine Chapel ceiling and the Last Judgment, and his architectural designs for St. Peter's Basilica exemplify the high Renaissance synthesis of classical ideals and intense personal expression. Raphael Sanzio, 1483 to 1520, celebrated for the harmony, balance, and serene beauty of his compositions. Raphael synthesized the innovations of Leonardo and Michelangelo into a style of effortless grace. His Vatican stanze frescoes, particularly the School of Athens, which depicts classical philosophers in a perfectly perspectival architectural setting, and his numerous Madonnas, are considered pinnacles of high Renaissance classicism. These artists not only mastered the new techniques of perspective, anatomy, and oil painting but also imbued their works with unparalleled intellectual depth and emotional resonance, setting a standard for Western art that would endure for centuries. Patronage, fueling artistic production. The extraordinary artistic output of the Renaissance was largely made possible by extensive and varied systems of patronage. Wealthy merchant families, most notably the Medici in Florence, became significant patrons, commissioning artworks to display their wealth, piety, civic pride, and cultural sophistication. Cosimo de' Medici, the Elder, and later Lorenzo de' Medici, the Magnificent, supported artists like Donatello, Brunelleschi, Botticelli, Leonardo da Vinci, and Michelangelo, transforming Florence into the epicenter of the early Renaissance. The papacy in Rome also emerged as a major patron, particularly during the High Renaissance. Popes like Julius II and Leo X Medici commissioned ambitious projects aimed at glorifying the Church and restoring Rome to its ancient splendor. Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel ceiling and Raphael's stanze frescoes were both papal commissions. Other patrons included civic institutions, guilds, which commissioned public art for churches and civic buildings, and confraternities. Patrons often played a direct role in the creation of art, dictating subject matter, materials, size, and even style to align with their specific aims, be they religious devotion, political propaganda, or personal commemoration. A work of art was often seen as a reflection of the patron's status and discernment. While this system provided essential financial support and impetus for many masterpieces, it also meant that artistic creation was often a negotiated process between the artist's vision and the patron's requirements, highlighting a complex power dynamic. This patronage system, however, was the economic engine that fueled much of the Renaissance's artistic brilliance. 6. Elaboration and emotion, Mannerism, Baroque, and Rococo, c. 1520s to 1780s. Following the High Renaissance, European art entered a period of stylistic diversification and evolving sensibilities. The calm harmony and idealized naturalism of the early 16th century gave way to more complex, emotive, and often theatrical modes of expression. These shifts were deeply intertwined with the religious, political, and social transformations of the era, including the Protestant Reformation, the Catholic Counter-Reformation, the rise of absolute monarchies, and changing aristocratic lifestyles. Mannerism, c. 1520 to 1600, a reaction to high Renaissance ideals. Emerging in the later years of the Italian High Renaissance, around 1520, and lasting until the end of the century, Mannerism represented a departure from the classical balance, harmony, and naturalism perfected by artists like Leonardo, Michelangelo, and Raphael. The term derived from the Italian maniera. Style or stylishness often implies artificiality, elegance, and sophistication. Mannerist artists deliberately elongated and distorted the human figure, employed complex and often ambiguous spatial compositions, and favored vibrant, sometimes clashing, color palettes. Their works are characterized by compositional tension, instability, and a focus on virtuosity and intellectual complexity over direct naturalistic representation. Key artists associated with Mannerism include Jacopo dal Pontormo, Rosso Fiorentino, Parmigianino, whose Madonna with the long neck is a quintessential example of Mannerist elongation and elegance, Agnolo Bronzino, known for his cool, polished portraits, and El Greco, whose intensely spiritual and uniquely stylized works represent a distinctive Spanish manifestation of the movement. The sack of Rome in 1527 by imperial troops is often cited as a pivotal event that disrupted the confidence of the High Renaissance and contributed to the more anxious and subjective tenor of Mannerist art. Mannerism can be interpreted as reflecting the spiritual and political anxieties of a turbulent age, as well as a self-conscious artistic exploration that sought novelty and sophistication, often catering to a refined courtly audience. Baroque, c. 1600 to 1750, grandeur, drama, and persuasion. The Baroque style, which originated in Rome around 1600 and spread throughout Europe, was characterized by dynamism, strong emotions, opulent ornamentation, and a dramatic use of light and shadow, chiaroscuro in its more intense form, tenebrism. It often aimed to create a sense of awe and grandeur, blurring the distinctions between painting, sculpture, and architecture to achieve unified, theatrical effects. A significant impetus for the Baroque style was the Catholic Counter-Reformation. The Council of Trent, 1545 to 1563, decreed that art should serve as a means of stimulating public faith and piety, leading the church to patronize art that was both sensuous and spiritual, accessible to the average churchgoer, yet conveying divine splendor. Baroque art thus became a powerful instrument of religious persuasion, designed to overwhelm the senses and inspire devotion. Absolute monarchs also embraced the Baroque style to project their power and magnificence, leading to lavish palaces and grandiloquent allegorical paintings. Key artists and regional variations include Osteresque Italian Baroque, dominated by figures like Caravaggio, whose dramatic realism and use of tenebrism revolutionized painting, and Gian Lorenzo Bernini, a master sculptor and architect whose works epitomize Baroque theatricality, dynamism, and emotional intensity. For example, Ecstasy of St. Teresa, the colonnade of St. Peter's Basilica. Asterisk Flemish Baroque, Peter Paul Rubens was a leading figure, known for his energetic compositions, rich colors, and sensuous depiction of figures in mythological and religious scenes. Asterisk Dutch Baroque Golden Age. In the Protestant Netherlands, art catered more to a bourgeois clientele. Rembrandt van Rijn excelled in portraiture, biblical scenes imbued with profound psychological depth, and masterful use of light and shadow. Johannes Vermeer created serene, luminous genre scenes of domestic life. Asterisk Spanish Baroque. Artists like Diego Velázquez produced powerful realistic portraits for the court and deeply moving religious works. Asterisk French Baroque. While influenced by Italian Baroque, French art under Louis XIV often displayed more classical restraint, as seen in the paintings of Nicolas Poussin, though grand portraiture by artists like Hyacinthe Rigaud also flourished. Theatricality was a defining, evolving trait from the Baroque onwards. Artists like Caravaggio and Bernini used dramatic lighting and compositions to create stage-like effects, engaging viewers intensely. Bernini's Ecstasy of St. Teresa, for example, transforms the chapel into a veritable theater, complete with sculpted spectators. This notion of the artist as a director of experiences, using illusion and emotional cues to captivate the audience, became increasingly prominent. Rococo, c. 1720s to 1780s, elegance, intimacy, and aristocratic leisure. Emerging in France during the early 18th century, primarily after the death of Louis XIV, the Rococo style represented a shift away from the grandiosity and formality of the Baroque towards a more intimate, light-hearted, and decorative aesthetic. It is characterized by pastel color palettes, asymmetrical designs, sinuous curves, rocaille, and themes centered on love, courtship, mythology, aristocratic leisure, and pastoral fantasies. Rococo art and interior design flourished in the private salons of the Parisian aristocracy, which became centers of fashionable social life. Key artists of the Rococo include Asterisk Jean-Antoine Watteau, considered a pioneer of the Rococo. Watteau is celebrated for his fates gallant, dreamlike scenes of elegantly dressed aristocrats engaged in amorous conversations and leisurely pursuits in idyllic parkland settings. His works often have a wistful, melancholic undertone. Asterisk François Boucher, known for his sensuous depictions of mythological scenes, pastoral subjects, and portraits, often featuring rosy-cheeked nudes and charming, decorative compositions. He was a favorite of Madame de Pompadour, Louis XV's mistress. Asterisk Jean-Honoré Fragonard, famous for his exuberantly painted scenes of love, flirtation, and playful eroticism, such as the swing. His work captures the carefree spirit and sensuality often associated with the Rococo. Rococo art, while inheriting a degree of Baroque theatricality, transformed it into more intimate, staged pleasantries. Watteau often incorporated figures from the Commedia dell'arte into his Fates galants, and Fragonard's paintings are rich in playful symbolism and voyeuristic engagement. The salon itself became a stage for aristocratic social performance. The stylistic shifts from the High Renaissance through Mannerism, Baroque, and Rococo were not merely aesthetic whims but were deeply symptomatic of, and responsive to, profound changes in religious authority, the Reformation and Counter-Reformation, political power structures, the rise of nation-states and absolute monarchies, followed by the ascendancy of aristocratic social circles, and underlying societal anxieties or aspirations. Mannerism's unsettling qualities emerged in a period of crisis. Baroque grandeur mirrored the confidence of the revitalized Catholic Church in powerful monarchs, and Rococo intimacy reflected the refined pleasures of a specific elite. This period also saw an increasing differentiation in art production and consumption based on social class. While Grand Baroque art could address and aim to influence broader public audiences, Rococo was almost exclusively an art for and about the aristocracy, displayed in private, elite spaces. This foreshadowed later, more pronounced distinctions between high art and popular or mass culture, and the diverse roles artists would play within these evolving spheres. 7. Reason, Revolution, and the Self, Neoclassicism and Romanticism, c. 1750s to 1850s. The latter half of the 18th century and the first half of the 19th century were marked by dramatic intellectual, political, and social upheavals, including the Enlightenment, the American and French revolutions, and the Napoleonic Wars. These transformative events profoundly impacted artistic expression, giving rise to two major, often contrasting but sometimes overlapping, movements, Neoclassicism and Romanticism. Both sought to imbue art with serious purpose, reacting against the perceived frivolity of the preceding Rococo style, yet they proposed different paths for art's role in a rapidly changing world. Neoclassicism, the call for order, virtue, and rationality. Neoclassicism, emerging around 1750 and flourishing into the early 19th century, represented a revival of the forms and values of ancient Greek and Roman art and culture. This movement was deeply influenced by the ideals of the Enlightenment, which championed reason, order, scientific inquiry, and moral virtue. The rediscovery and excavation of ancient Roman cities like Pompeii and Herculaneum provided direct visual inspiration, while the writings of scholars like Joachim Winckelmann, who urged artists to imitate the noble simplicity and calm grandeur of classical art, provided a theoretical framework. Neoclassicism was, in part, a reaction against the ornate and sensuous Rococo style, seeking instead clarity, discipline, and didactic purpose. Characterized by clean lines, balanced compositions, subdued colors, an emphasis on precise drawing over painterly effects, and smooth surfaces, neoclassical art often depicted subjects from classical history and mythology, chosen to convey moral lessons, civic virtue, and patriotic ideals. Key figures of neoclassicism include Jacques-Louis David, 1748-1825, the preeminent neoclassical painter. David's work became closely associated with the French Revolution and later, Napoleon Bonaparte. His history paintings, such as Oath of the Harédy, 1784, and The Death of Marat, 1793, exemplified neoclassical austerity and served as powerful political propaganda, glorifying republican virtues, sacrifice, and revolutionary ideals. Antonio Canova, 1757-1822, the leading neoclassical sculptor, Canova was renowned for his idealized figures, refined marble surfaces that seemed as supple as flesh, and his ability to capture a sense of calm repose inspired by classical antiquities. Works like Cupid and Psyche and Perseus with the head of Medusa embody the neoclassical pursuit of ideal form. Neoclassicism was thus more than an aesthetic preference. It was an ideological movement that sought to use the perceived moral clarity and rational order of the ancient world as a model for contemporary society, particularly in times of revolutionary change. The rise of arts academies, standardizing training and taste. The 17th and 18th centuries saw the establishment and consolidation of powerful arts academies across Europe, most notably the Académie Royale de Peinture et de Sculpture in Paris, founded 1648, and the Royal Academy of Arts in London, founded 1768. These institutions played a crucial role in shaping artistic training, taste, and the professional status of artists. Academies ran art schools that emphasized a rigorous, standardized curriculum based on drawing from classical cast and live models, and copying old masters. They established a hierarchy of genres, placing history painting, depicting biblical, mythological, or historical subjects with a moral message, at the apex, followed by portraiture, genre scenes, landscape, and still life. This hierarchy influenced the prestige and value accorded to different types of art. Academies also held official, juried exhibitions, known as salons in Paris, which became the primary venues for artists to display their work, gain recognition, and secure patronage. By controlling education and exhibition opportunities, academies wielded considerable power over public taste and official patronage, effectively defining good art for much of this period. They aimed to elevate the status of artists from mere craftsmen to educated intellectuals, aligning art with the liberal arts. While professionalizing art and fostering a shared artistic language, the prescriptive nature and institutional power of the academies eventually bred discontent. Their emphasis on classical ideals and historical subjects, and their often rigid adherence to established conventions, became increasingly perceived by some as out of step with the changing realities and sensibilities of the modern world. This very success and dominance inadvertently sowed the seeds of opposition, as the Academy's resistance to change became a primary catalyst for the emergence of avant-garde movements that sought greater artistic freedom and contemporary relevance. Romanticism, emotion, individualism, nature, and the sublime. Emerging in the late 18th century and flourishing in the first half of the 19th century, Romanticism offered a powerful counterpoint to neoclassical rationalism and the Enlightenment's emphasis on empirical observation. It was a multifaceted movement that prioritized intense emotion, individualism, imagination, the power and often untamed beauty of nature, and a fascination with the past, especially the medieval period, folklore, and the exotic. Romantic art is characterized by its dramatic compositions, expressive use of color and brushwork, and a focus on subjective experience. Common themes include heroism, revolution, love, death, the supernatural, and the sublime, experiences of awe, terror, and overwhelming grandeur, often evoked by vast, wild landscapes or powerful natural phenomena. Romanticism celebrated the artist as a visionary individual, capable of profound feeling and unique insight. Key Romantic artists include Francisco Goya, 1746–1828, whose later works, such as the 3rd of May 1808 and his black paintings, powerfully express the horrors of war, social critique, and the darker aspects of human psychology. Caspar David Friedrich, 1774–1840, a German landscape painter whose evocative scenes, like Wanderer Above the Sea of Fog, often feature solitary figures contemplating vast, atmospheric, and spiritually charged natural settings. J. M. W. Turner, 1775–1851, an English painter renowned for his dramatic and often abstract depictions of light, atmosphere, and the elemental forces of nature, particularly storms and seascapes, for example, The Slave Ship. Jean Delacroix, 1798–1863, a leading figure of French Romanticism. Delacroix's paintings, such as Liberty Leading the People and Death of Sardanapalus, are characterized by their vibrant color, dynamic compositions, and emotionally charged subject matter drawn from history, literature, and contemporary events. Theodore Géricault, 1791–1824, whose iconic painting The Wrath of the Medusa captured a contemporary tragedy with dramatic intensity and raw emotion, highlighting human suffering and struggle. Romanticism reflected a profound shift in Western consciousness, a reaction to the perceived limitations of pure reason and a growing awareness of the complexities of human emotion and the power of the individual spirit. It was deeply engaged with the political and social currents of the age, often expressing ideals of liberty, nationalism, and sympathy for the oppressed. The romantic fascination with the sublime can be interpreted as an early artistic confrontation with the limits of human understanding and control in the face of overwhelming natural or emotional forces. This focus on the unknown, the mysterious, and the potentially terrifying aspects of existence prefigured modern art's deeper engagement with psychological states, existential questions, and the human condition in a rapidly changing, often unsettling, world. Neoclassicism and Romanticism, often presented as stylistic opposites, can be understood as complementary, dialectical responses to the intellectual and societal upheavals of their time. One sought to impose order, reason, and civic virtue, drawing inspiration from an idealized classical past to shape a new future. The other championed individual emotion, imagination, and the untamed forces of nature and the human spirit, often fueling revolutionary fervor or expressing profound personal experiences within a tumultuous world. Both movements, however, rejected the aristocratic sensibilities of the Rococo and aimed to invest art with a renewed sense of gravity and purpose, reflecting the era's profound transformations. 8. The modern world in view, realism, impressionism, and post-impressionism, c. 1840s to 1900s. The mid to late 19th century was a period of accelerated change, marked by industrialization, urbanization, scientific advancements, and shifting social structures. Artistic movements during this era grappled with these transformations, leading to radical departures from academic tradition and a redefinition of art's purpose and techniques. The invention of photography, the rise of social consciousness, and engagement with non-Western art forms all played crucial roles in shaping the trajectory of modern art. The impact of photography, a new lens on reality. The invention and rapid development of photography in the 19th century had a revolutionary impact on the visual arts. Initially, some painters feared that this new medium, capable of capturing reality with seemingly objective precision, would render their skills obsolete. Paul Delaroche is famously, though perhaps apocryphally, quoted as exclaiming, "From today, painting is dead." Photography democratized portraiture, making likenesses accessible beyond the wealthy elite who could afford painted portraits. It also provided artists with a new tool for observation, study, for example, of anatomy or movement, and reference. More profoundly, photography acted as a catalyst for innovation in painting. By challenging painting's traditional role as the primary means of mimesis, photography liberated painters to explore avenues beyond strict realistic representation. Artists began to focus on what painting could achieve that photography could not: the subjective interpretation of reality, the expressive power of color and brushstroke, the capturing of fleeting sensations, and the exploration of formal qualities. Furthermore, photographic aesthetics, such as candid moments, cropped compositions, and unusual perspectives, began to influence painters, notably the Impressionists. Thus, photography, rather than killing painting, spurred its reinvention and pushed it towards modernism. Realism, depicting an idealized contemporary life and social commentary. Flourishing from the 1840s, realism emerged as a direct response to the idealized conventions of academic art and the exotic or emotional excesses of romanticism. Realist painters sought to convey a truthful and objective vision of contemporary life, often focusing on the everyday experiences, labor, and social conditions of the working class and peasantry. Their approach was based on direct observation of the modern world, often rendered with gritty detail. Key figures of realism include Gustave Courbet, 1819–1877, the leading proponent of the movement. Courbet famously stated, "Painting is an essentially concrete art and can only consist in the representation of real and existing things." He challenged the academic hierarchy of genres by depicting ordinary people and scenes, such as in The Stonebreakers, Destroyed, and A Burial at Ornans, on the monumental scale traditionally reserved for a history painting. His work was often seen as politically subversive due to its unidealized portrayal of rural life and poverty, and his explicit socialist leanings. When his works were rejected by the 1855 Exposition Universelle, he organized his own independent exhibition, the Pavillon du Réalisme, issuing a manifesto that asserted his goal to translate the customs, the ideas, the appearance of my epoch according to my own estimation. Jean-François Millet, 1814–1875, known for his dignified portrayals of peasant life and rural labor, such as The Gleaners. While his style was often more sentimental and idealized than Courbet's, his focus on the hardships of the rural poor also carried social and political implications. Honoré Daumier, 1808–1879, a prolific lithographer and painter, Daumier offered sharp social commentary on urban life, the bourgeoisie, and political corruption. His paintings of third-class railway carriages highlighted socio-economic distinctions in the newly modernized city. Realism was deeply engaged with the social transformations wrought by the Industrial Revolution, including urbanization, new class structures, and labor conditions. It aimed to democratize art by making the lives of ordinary people worthy of serious artistic representation. The Salon des Refusés, 1863, and the rise of the avant-garde. The official Paris Salon, controlled by the conservative Académie des Beaux-Arts, remained the primary venue for artists to gain recognition and patronage. However, its jury frequently rejected works that deviated from academic norms in style or subject matter. In 1863, an unusually large number of rejections, over 3,000 works, caused a public outcry among artists and their supporters. In response, Emperor Napoleon III decreed that the rejected artworks could be exhibited in a separate exhibition, dubbed the Salon des Refusés, Exhibition of Rejects. Though many works in the Salon des Refusés were met with public ridicule and critical scorn, the event proved to be a watershed moment. It provided a prominent platform for artists who were challenging artistic conventions, most famously Edouard Manet, whose painting Le Déjeuner sur l'herbe, Luncheon on the Grass, caused a major scandal due to its modern subject matter and unconventional treatment of the nude. The Salon des Refusés weakened the absolute authority of the official salon and emboldened avant-garde artists to seek alternative venues and organize their own independent exhibitions. It marked a significant step in the shift of power within the art world from established institutions to independent, forward-thinking artists. Impressionism, capturing light, fleeting moments, and modern life. Impressionism, which emerged in the early 1870s and held its first independent group exhibition in 1874, pushed the boundaries of painting even further. The name was derived, initially derisively, from Claude Monet's painting Impression, Sunrise. Impressionist painters sought to capture the fleeting, sensory effect of a scene on the eye, the impression, particularly the transient effects of light and atmosphere. Key characteristics and techniques included painting in plein air, outdoors, to directly observe and capture the changing qualities of natural light. Short, broken brush strokes, applied quickly to convey the immediacy of perception and the shimmering quality of light. Pure, unblended colors, often applied side by side to create optical mixing in the viewer's eye, resulting in vibrant and luminous surfaces. Shadows were often rendered in color rather than traditional grays or blacks. Depiction of modern life. Impressionists frequently painted scenes of contemporary urban Paris, boulevards, cafes, theaters, suburban leisure, boating, picnics, and landscapes transformed by industrialization, railways, factories. Leading Impressionists included Claude Monet, known for his series paintings exploring light at different times of day, for example, haystacks, Rouen Cathedral, water lilies, Pierre-Auguste Renoir, celebrated for his depictions of joyful social gatherings and sensuous figures. Edgar Degas, masterful at capturing movement and modern urban subjects like ballet dancers, racehorses, and café scenes, often with innovative compositions influenced by photography and Japanese prints. And Camille Pissarro, a consistent exhibitor and mentor, known for his landscapes and cityscapes. Berthe Morisot and Mary Cassatt were also significant female Impressionist painters. The Impressionists organized 8 of their own exhibitions between 1874 and 1886, further establishing their independence from the Salon system. Their work represented a radical break with academic tradition, prioritizing subjective visual experience and the dynamism of modern existence. Post-Impressionism, c. 1886 to 1905, diverse responses to Impressionism. Post-Impressionism is not a single, unified movement but rather an umbrella term encompassing a range of distinct artistic styles that emerged from, and often reacted against, Impressionism in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. While Impressionists focused on the objective, optical qualities of light and color, Post-Impressionists sought to imbue their work with greater emotional depth, symbolic content, formal structure, or spiritual meaning. They moved beyond capturing fleeting moments to explore more personal and enduring expressions. Key figures and their distinct approaches include Vincent van Gogh, 1853 to 1890, used intense, often non-naturalistic color, vigorous impasto brushwork, and swirling forms to convey his emotional and spiritual turmoil. For example, The Starry Night, Sunflowers. Paul Gauguin, 1848 to 1903, developed synthetism, characterized by bold, flat areas of color, strong outlines, and simplified forms, often depicting scenes from Brittany or Tahiti imbued with symbolism, spirituality, and a primitive sensibility. For example, Vision after the Sermon, Where Do We Come From? What Are We? Where Are We Going? Paul Cézanne, 1839 to 1906, emphasized the underlying geometric structure of nature, using constructive brush strokes to build form and explore multiple viewpoints within a single composition. His analytical approach to form and space profoundly influenced Cubism. For example, Mont Saint-Victoire series, Still Lifes. Georges Seurat, 1859 to 1891, developed pointillism or divisionism, a scientific technique of applying small, distinct dots of pure color that would blend optically in the viewer's eye, aiming for greater luminosity and formal order. For example, A Sunday Afternoon on the Island of La Grande Jatte. These artists, among others, laid crucial groundwork for the major modernist movements of the 20th century, each charting a unique path away from naturalistic representation towards more abstract, expressive, or conceptual forms of art. Japonism, the influence of Japanese art. The forced reopening of Japan to Western trade in 1853 led to a widespread fascination in Europe and America with Japanese art and culture, a phenomenon known as Japonism. Japanese ukiyo-e woodblock prints, ceramics, textiles, and other decorative objects flooded Western markets and captivated artists with their distinct aesthetic. Japanese art influenced Impressionist and Post-Impressionist painters in numerous ways. Compositional strategies, asymmetrical arrangements, higher viewpoints, dramatic cropping of figures and scenes, and the use of empty space. Stylistic elements, flat planes of color, bold outlines, emphasis on pattern and decorative qualities, and a lack of traditional Western perspective in chiaroscuro. Subject matter, scenes of everyday life, nature, flowers, birds, landscapes, and women in intimate settings. Artists like Monet, who created a Japanese garden at Giverny, Degas, Cassatt, Van Gogh, who copied Japanese prints, Gauguin, and Whistler all absorbed and adapted elements of Japonism into their work. This infusion of non-Western aesthetic principles provided a vital catalyst for breaking away from academic conventions and contributed significantly to the development of a modern visual language. Japonism effectively decentered Western artistic traditions by introducing powerful alternative models for representation and design, accelerating the move towards abstraction and new forms of expression. The convergence of these factors, the challenge of photography, the social consciousness of realism, the rise of the avant-garde through events like the Salon des Refusés, the perceptual innovations of Impressionism, the diverse explorations of Post-Impressionism, and the fresh perspectives offered by Japonism, collectively propelled Western art into a near of unprecedented experimentation and redefinition. This period was symptomatic of broader societal modernization, as artists sought new forms and subjects to reflect their changing world, and new systems of exhibition and patronage emerged to support these evolving artistic visions, signaling a decisive shift away from aristocratic and academic dominance. 9. The expanding art world, markets, critics, collectors, and vernacular displays in the 19th century. The 19th century witnessed a dramatic transformation of the art world's infrastructure, moving beyond traditional patronage systems towards a more complex and market-driven environment. This expansion was fueled by industrial wealth, the rise of a middle class, new modes of communication, and evolving ideas about the role of art and the artist in society. Evolution of the art market, from patronage to public sale. While patronage from aristocracy and the church continued, The 19th century saw a significant shift towards an open art market where works were bought and sold as commodities. This trend had roots in earlier centuries, with Venice and Florence having early free markets for art, but it accelerated dramatically in the 1800s. ** Rise of art dealers and commercial galleries. Specialized art dealers and commercial galleries became increasingly influential, particularly for avant-garde artists who were often excluded from official salons. Dealers like Paul Durand-Ruel in Paris played a pivotal role in supporting and promoting the Impressionists, providing them with financial backing and exhibition opportunities when academic institutions rejected them. These galleries created new venues for artists to reach potential buyers. * Development of auctions. Art auctions, which had existed since antiquity and saw a revival in 18th century London and Paris with firms like Christie's, founded 1766, and Sotheby's, whose art auctions grew in the 18th century, became more professionalized and prominent. Importantly, art by living artists began to be sold at auction, as seen with the Barbizon school painters, indicating a growing market for contemporary work. The French Revolution and Napoleonic Wars also led to the dispersal of many aristocratic collections, further fueling the auction market. * The rise of middle-class collectors. The Industrial Revolution created new fortunes and a burgeoning middle class with disposable income and cultural aspirations. This group became significant art collectors, particularly in rapidly industrializing nations like Britain and the United States. American industrialists, sometimes dubbed robber barons, for example, J. P. Morgan, Henry Clay Frick, Andrew Mellon, amassed vast collections, often acquiring European old masters as status symbols but also, increasingly, contemporary art. This new class of collectors had diverse tastes and helped create demand for a wider range of art beyond what was favored by traditional aristocratic patrons. These developments contributed to a partial democratization of art ownership and provided artists with alternative pathways for income and recognition, lessening their dependence on the whims of individual patrons or the rigid judgments of academic bodies. However, this shift also subjected art more directly to the fluctuations and pressures of market forces and commercial tastes. The emergence and influence of art criticism. As art became more public and the art market expanded, the role of the art critic gained unprecedented importance. While figures like Denis Diderot had pioneered art criticism in the 18th century with his influential reviews of the Paris salons, the 19th century saw critics become powerful shapers of public opinion and artistic reputations. Critics like Charles Baudelaire in France championed modernity in art, advocating for artists who captured the heroism of modern life. He was an early supporter of artists like Eugène Delacroix and later, Édouard Manet, whose work he saw as reflecting contemporary experience. Émile Zola, the novelist, was a fervent defender of Manet and the early Impressionists, using his literary platform to argue for their innovative vision against conservative detractors. John Ruskin in England, though often focused on earlier art and architecture, also wielded considerable influence, emphasizing the moral and social dimensions of art and championing artists like J. M. W. Turner while critiquing others. These critics, writing in newspapers, journals, and pamphlets, acted as crucial intermediaries between artists and a growing, often bewildered, public. They could make or break artistic careers, define art movements, and legitimize new forms of expression. Art criticism became a vital part of cultural discourse, fostering debate and helping to construct the historical narrative of art. The role of the connoisseur. Alongside the critic, the figure of the art connoisseur continued to play a significant role, particularly in the market for old master paintings and in the burgeoning field of art history. Connoisseurs possess specialized knowledge for attributing artworks to specific artists, authenticating them, and evaluating their quality and historical significance. Their expertise was crucial for collectors building their holdings and for newly established public museums seeking to acquire foundational works. Figures like Bernard Berenson, active in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, became legendary for their ability to identify the hands of Renaissance masters. Connoisseurship, though sometimes criticized for its subjectivity or elitism, was instrumental in organizing art historical knowledge, establishing the provenance of artworks, and influencing both market values and museum collections. The intertwined development of the art market, museums, and academic art history in this period relied heavily on the discernment of connoisseurs. Vernacular art and domestic display, art beyond institutions. While the formal art world of academies, salons, galleries, and museums was undergoing these transformations, a vibrant tradition of vernacular, folk, or naive art continued to thrive outside these institutional frameworks. This category encompasses a wide range of artistic expressions created by individuals without formal academic training, often for personal, communal, decorative, or utilitarian purposes. Such art was typically displayed in domestic spaces, the mom's refrigerator of its time, or in community settings rather than formal exhibition venues. Folk art often relied on local traditions, materials, and knowledge, passed down through families or communities. It could include paintings, sculptures, textiles like oak rugs in Newfoundland, furniture, and various crafted objects. While sometimes dismissed by the formal art world as less sophisticated, vernacular art often possessed a directness, vitality, and unique regional character. The term folk art itself was popularized in the late 19th and early 20th centuries as art historians and collectors began to recognize its value and distinctiveness. The display of these objects in homes, whether kitchen tools with interesting designs or fancily hooked mats, reflected a desire for aesthetic pleasure and personalization of living spaces, demonstrating that the appreciation and creation of art were not limited to elite or institutional contexts. This parallel world of art making underscores the diverse ways in which human creativity finds expression across different social strata and cultural settings. The 19th century, therefore, was not just an era of stylistic revolution, but also one of profound structural change in how art was made, sold, viewed, and valued. The rise of a more public and commercial art world, the increasing influence of critics and dealers, the diversification of collectors, and the continued presence of vernacular traditions all contributed to a more complex and dynamic artistic landscape, setting the stage for the even more radical developments of the 20th century. Part IV, the shattering of tradition and the dawn of the globalized contemporary. The 20th century unleashed a torrent of artistic experimentation that fundamentally reshaped the definition, production, and reception of art. Driven by profound societal shifts, world wars, technological acceleration, psychoanalytic thought, and globalization, artists broke decisively with past traditions, exploring abstraction, subjectivity, and new media. The latter part of the century and the dawn of the 21st saw the art world become increasingly interconnected, diverse, and confronted by the transformative power of digital technologies. 10. The avant-gardes and the modernist revolution. Early mid-20th century. The early to mid-20th century was a period of unprecedented artistic upheaval, characterized by a rapid succession of avant-garde movements that collectively forged the modernist revolution. These movements, building on the groundwork laid by post-impressionism, sought to radically redefine art's forms, functions, and relationship to society. They challenged traditional notions of representation, beauty, and the role of the artist, often reflecting the anxieties and dynamism of a rapidly changing world. Symbolism and Art Nouveau, bridging the centuries. As the 19th century drew to a close, Symbolism and Art Nouveau emerged as significant transitional movements, reacting against the naturalism of Impressionism and Realism, while paving the way for more abstract and subjective forms of expression. Symbolism, c. 1880s to 1910s, originating as a literary movement in France, symbolism in the visual arts emphasized the expression of ideas, emotions, and psychological truths through suggestive symbols, rather than direct representation. Artists sought to evoke a world beyond superficial appearances, delving into themes of dreams, the subconscious, mysticism, mythology, the erotic, and the decadent. Key characteristics include stylized and abstract forms, dreamlike imagery, and a focus on personal, often obscure, meanings. Prominent symbolist painters included Gustave Moreau, known for his richly detailed mythological and biblical scenes, or Dillon Redun, whose works explored fantastical creatures and the inner world of dreams and nightmares, and Gustav Klimt, an Austrian artist whose opulent, decorative paintings often incorporated gold leaf and explored themes of love, death, and sensuality, bridging Symbolism and Art Nouveau. Symbolism rejected the materialism and rationalism of the era, offering an escape into subjective experience and spiritual exploration. Art Nouveau, c. 1890 to 1910, an international style of art, architecture, and applied arts. Art Nouveau was characterized by its organic, sinuous lines, stylized natural forms, flowers, vines, insects, and a desire to unify art and craft. It aimed to create a new art free from the historicism that dominated much of 19th century design, drawing inspiration from nature's unruly aspects and often incorporating asymmetry and whiplash curves. Art Nouveau found expression in painting, graphic design, especially posters, architecture, interior design, glasswork, jewelry, and furniture. Key figures include Alphonse Mucha, Czech graphic artist famous for his decorative posters of elegant women with flowing hair and ornate floral motifs, Gustav Klimt, whose work, like the Kiss, exemplifies Art Nouveau's decorative richness and eroticism, and Louis Comfort Tiffany, American designer renowned for his Favre glass lamps and windows, featuring iridescent colors and nature-inspired designs. Art Nouveau sought to bring beauty to everyday objects and environments, often influenced by the arts and crafts movement and Japanese art. Both Symbolism and Art Nouveau emphasized subjectivity, decorative qualities, and a departure from strict naturalism, influencing subsequent avant-garde movements. Further avant-garde movements like Fauvism, Cubism, Futurism, Dadaism, Surrealism, etc., would be detailed here in a full report, following the outline structure. This would include their characteristics, key artists, manifestos, and reactions to preceding art and contemporary societal changes. For brevity in this example, I will move towards abstract expressionism as indicated by the outline structure in the prompt, but a complete report would cover these intermediate movements thoroughly. Abstract expressionism, the New York School and post-reassertiveness. Emerging in New York City in the 1940s and flourishing in the 1950s, abstract expressionism marked a pivotal moment in modern art, signifying the shift of the art world center from Paris to New York. It was the first specifically American movement to achieve international influence. Born out of the anxieties of the Great Depression and World War II, and influenced by European surrealist emigres who brought ideas of automatism and the subconscious to America, abstract expressionism was characterized by its large scale, emotional intensity, and emphasis on individual, often spontaneous, expression. Key characteristics include asterisk non-representational forms, a general move away from depicting recognizable objects. Asterisk emphasis on the act of creation, the process of painting itself became a central aspect of the artwork. Asterisk emotional and subjective expression, art was seen as a direct outpouring of the artist's inner world. Two main tendencies developed within abstract expressionism. Asterisk action painting, gestural abstraction, led by artists like Jackson Pollock, famous for his drip and splash technique, pouring paint onto canvases laid on the floor, and Willem de Kooning, known for his energetic, often aggressive brushwork and figures that verged on abstraction, as in his Woman series. This approach emphasized the physical act of painting, with sweeping gestural marks and an impression of spontaneity. Frans Klein also contributed with his bold, black and white calligraphic abstractions. Asterisk color field painting, practiced by artists such as Mark Rothko, renowned for his large canvases featuring soft-edged, luminous rectangles of color intended to evoke profound emotional and contemplative responses. Barnett Newman, known for his zip paintings, large fields of color divided by thin vertical lines, and Cleaford Still. These artists focused on the expressive power of large areas of flat, solid color to create an immersive and meditative experience for the viewer. Abstract expressionism had a profound impact, championing artistic freedom and individual expression, and paving the way for subsequent movements by challenging traditional notions of what art could be. 11. The mid-century shift, pop art, minimalism, and conceptual art. The mid-20th century witnessed a series of artistic movements that reacted against the perceived emotionalism and elitism of abstract expressionism, while also engaging critically with the burgeoning consumer culture and media landscape of the post-war era. Pop art, minimalism, and conceptual art, each in its own way, challenged traditional definitions of art, the role of the artist, and the experience of the viewer. Pop art, embracing and critiquing consumer culture. Emerging independently in Britain in the mid-1950s, and slightly later in the United States in the late 1950s and 1960s, pop art drew its inspiration directly from popular and commercial culture, including advertising, comic books, Hollywood movies, product packaging, and mass media imagery. It marked a radical departure from the non-representational and subjectively expressive aims of abstract expressionism, instead turning an often ironic or celebratory eye on the mundane and ubiquitous elements of contemporary life. Key characteristics of pop art include asterisk use of recognizable imagery, from everyday objects like Campbell's soup cans to celebrity icons like Marilyn Monroe. Asterisk bold colors and graphic styles, often mimicking the techniques of commercial printing, for example, Ben Day Dutz and Lichtenstein's work. Asterisk repetition and seriality, reflecting mass production and media saturation. Asterisk blurring of high and low art, elevating commonplace subjects and commercial aesthetics to the realm of fine art. Asterisk irony and critique, while sometimes appearing to celebrate consumerism, pop art often contained underlying critiques of societal values, mass media manipulation, and the nature of fame. Prominent pop artists include asterisk Andy Warhol, USA, famous for his screen prints of Campbell's soup cans, Coca-Cola bottles, and celebrities like Marilyn Monroe and Elvis Presley. Warhol explored themes of mass production, consumerism, and celebrity culture, often with a detached, mechanical approach. Asterisk Roy Lichtenstein, USA, known for his large-scale paintings based on comic book imagery, complete with Ben Day Dutz and speech bubbles, recontextualizing popular narratives and graphic styles. Asterisk Glaze Oldenburg, USA, created large-scale sculptures of everyday objects, often in soft materials, for example, giant soft fan, or as monumental public art, for example, Spoonbridge and Cherry, transforming the familiar into the uncanny and humorous. Asterisk Richard Hamilton, UK, one of the pioneers of British pop art, his 1956 collage Just What Is It That Makes Today's Homes So Different, So Appealing? Is considered a seminal work, critiquing post-war consumerism. Pop art democratized art by making it more accessible and relatable to a broader audience, while simultaneously challenging traditional artistic hierarchies and prompting critical reflection on the nature of contemporary culture. Minimalism, stripping art to its essentials. Emerging in the 1960s, primarily in New York, minimalism was a direct reaction against the emotional subjectivity and gestural complexity of abstract expressionism. Minimalist artists sought to create art that was devoid of personal expression, metaphor, or illusion, focusing instead on the literal presence of the artwork and its interaction with real space. They aimed to strip art down to its most fundamental elements, simple geometric forms, industrial materials, and often, seriality or repetition. Key characteristics of minimalism include Geometric abstraction, use of simple shapes like cubes, grids, and lines. Industrial materials, employing materials such as steel, aluminum, plexiglass, fluorescent lights, and bricks, often fabricated rather than handcrafted by the artist. Seriality and repetition, using modular units and repeated forms to emphasize objectivity and avoid compositional hierarchy. Rejection of illusionism and representation, artworks were presented as objects in themselves, not representations of something else. Emphasis on the viewer's phenomenological experience, the viewer's perception of the work in relation to their own body and the surrounding space became a key concern. Influential minimalist artists include Donald Judd, known for his specific objects, three-dimensional works that were neither painting nor traditional sculpture, often consisting of stacked or arranged geometric boxes made from industrial materials. His essay Specific Objects, 1965, was a key theoretical text for the movement. Sol LeWitt, a pioneer of both minimalism and conceptual art, LeWitt created modular sculptures and, famously, wall drawings based on predetermined systems and instructions, emphasizing the idea over the execution. Dan Flavin, used commercially available fluorescent light tubes to create installations that transformed architectural spaces with light and color, exploring seriality and site specificity. Carl Andre, known for his floor sculptures made of identical industrial units like metal plates or bricks, arranged in simple grid formations, challenging traditional notions of sculptural form and presentation. Minimalism sought an art of utmost clarity and objectivity, pushing abstraction to its logical limits and fundamentally questioning the nature of the art object and its relationship to the viewer. Conceptual art, the primacy of the idea. Conceptual art, which also emerged in the mid-1960s and flourished into the 1970s, took the dematerialization of the art object even further than minimalism. For conceptual artists, the idea or concept behind the work was paramount, often more important than the physical manifestation of the artwork itself. As Sol LeWitt famously stated, in conceptual art the idea or concept is the most important aspect of the work. All of the planning and decisions are made beforehand and the execution is a perfunctory affair. The idea becomes a machine that makes the art. Key characteristics and forms of conceptual art. Idea is art. The concept itself is considered the artwork, and the physical form it takes, if any, is secondary, often serving merely as documentation or a vehicle for the idea. Dematerialization of the art object. Works might consist of written texts, instructions, photographs, maps, diagrams, performances, or ephemeral actions, rather than traditional paintings or sculptures. Use of language. Text often played a central role, with artists using language to convey propositions, instructions, or philosophical inquiries. Critique of art institutions and commodification. Conceptual artists often sought to subvert the traditional art market and museum system by creating works that were difficult to buy, sell, or collect in conventional ways. Emphasis on process and documentation. The process of thinking or creating could be as important as any end product, and documentation, photographs, texts, videos, often served as the primary way the artwork was experienced. Influential conceptual artists include Joseph Kosuth, known for works like 1 and 3 Chairs, 1965, which presented an actual chair, a photograph of the chair, and a dictionary definition of chair, questioning the nature of representation and meaning. His essay Art After Philosophy, 1969, was a key manifesto for the movement. Lawrence Weiner, created text-based works, often presented as statements or propositions painted directly on gallery walls or existing in other forms, emphasizing that the idea itself could constitute the artwork. For example, O36, X36, removal to the Laughing OR support wall of plaster OR wallboard from a wall. Sol LeWitt, as mentioned under minimalism, LeWitt's work, particularly his emphasis on instructions for creating wall drawings, also aligns strongly with conceptual art principles. Art and Language, a collective of artists who used text, discussions, and publications to critically examine the nature of art and art practice. Robert Barry, known for works involving invisible or ephemeral elements, such as his Inert Gas series, where he released noble gases into the atmosphere. Conceptual art radically expanded the definition of art, challenging viewers to engage intellectually with ideas rather than purely aesthetically with objects. It questioned the very nature of art, authorship, and originality, paving the way for many contemporary art practices. These mid-century movements, pop art's engagement with mass culture, minimalism's pursuit of objective presence, and conceptual art's elevation of the idea, collectively dismantled many of the assumptions of abstract expressionism and earlier forms of modernism. They opened up new avenues for artistic exploration, emphasizing art's relationship to the broader culture, its material and phenomenological qualities, and its intellectual underpinnings, profoundly influencing the trajectory of art in the late 20th century and beyond. 12. Postmodernism and contemporary currents, late 20th century, present. The late 20th century and the early 21st century have been characterized by an unprecedented diversification of artistic practices, often grouped under the broad and sometimes contested umbrella of postmodernism and, more recently, contemporary art. These periods are marked by a critical engagement with the legacy of modernism, a questioning of grand narratives, an embrace of pluralism, and a profound intertwining with global culture, technology, and pressing social issues. Postmodernism in art, pastiche, irony, and the questioning of originality. Emerging in the late 1960s and gaining prominence through the 1970s and 1980s, postmodernism in art represented a reaction against the perceived limitations, elitism, and prescriptive nature of modernism. Modernism, particularly in its later phases like abstract expressionism and minimalism, often emphasized formal purity, artistic autonomy, originality, and the idea of a singular, progressive historical development in art. Postmodernism, in contrast, rejected the notion of a single dominant style or universal truth, embracing instead diversity, eclecticism, and a playful, often critical, engagement with history, popular culture, and the mechanisms of representation themselves. Key characteristics of postmodern art include pastiche, the imitation or blending of various styles from art history or popular culture, often without satirical intent, creating a collage-like effect. Irony and parody, the use of humor, wit, and irony to critique or subvert established conventions, cultural values, and even the seriousness of modernist art itself. Appropriation, the borrowing, quoting, or recontextualizing of existing images, objects, or styles from art history or mass media, challenging notions of originality and authorship. Questioning of originality and authorship. Postmodernism deconstructs the modernist ideal of the singular, genius artist creating entirely original work. It often emphasizes collaboration, the role of the viewer in creating meaning, and the idea that all cultural products are intertextual, built upon previous forms. This resonates with Roland Barthes' concept of the death of the author, where the reader-viewer, not the creator, is the primary locus of meaning. Blurring boundaries, a deliberate collapsing of distinctions between high art and low or popular culture, between different artistic disciplines, painting, sculpture, photography, video, performance, and between art and everyday life. Focus on identity and representation. Many postmodern artists explore issues of gender, race, sexuality, class, and cultural identity, critiquing and subverting dominant representations and stereotypes. Influence of critical theory. Postmodern art is heavily informed by post-structuralist philosophy, for example, Derrida, Foucault, deconstruction, feminist theory, and post-colonial theory, which provide frameworks for questioning power structures, language, and representation. Key artists associated with postmodernism include Cindy Sherman, known for her untitled film stills and other photographic series in which she appropriates and deconstructs female stereotypes from cinema and popular culture, questioning identity and representation. Jeff Koons, creates sculptures and paintings that often incorporate kitsch objects and consumer goods, blurring lines between high art and mass culture, and employing irony and pastiche, for example, stainless steel balloon animals, Michael Jackson and Bubbles. Barbara Kruger, uses bold, text-based works, often combining found photographs with declarative slogans in a style reminiscent of advertising, to critique consumerism, power structures, and gender roles. Jean-Michel Basquiat, emerged from the graffiti scene. His neo-expressionist paintings combined raw energy, symbolic imagery, and social commentary on race, class, and history. Sherry Levine, directly appropriated and rephotographed works by male modernist masters, for example, after Walker Evans, challenging concepts of originality, authorship, and the patriarchal nature of the art historical canon. Postmodernism fundamentally altered the art landscape by embracing a pluralistic and critical approach, acknowledging the complexities of meaning-making in a media-saturated, late 20th century culture. Contemporary art practices, late 20th century to present, diversity and new media. Contemporary art, generally referring to art produced from the 1970s onwards, is characterized by its immense diversity in terms of materials, methods, concepts, and subject matter. It lacks a single organizing principle or ism, reflecting a globally influenced, culturally diverse, and technologically advancing world. Contemporary art often engages with personal and cultural identity, family, community, nationality, and pressing social and political issues. Key contemporary art practices include installation art, large-scale, mixed-media constructions often designed for a specific site and for a temporary period. Installation art aims to create a total environment that the viewer experiences physically and sensorially, rather than viewing a discrete object. Artists like Ilya Kabakov, Cornelia Parker, and Yayoi Kusama are known for their immersive installations. Performance art, artworks created through actions performed by the artist or other participants, which can be live or recorded, spontaneous or scripted. It often challenges traditional art forms by emphasizing the body, time, and direct engagement with the audience. Key figures include Marina Abramovic, Vito Acconci, and Joan Jonas. Its roots can be traced to earlier movements like Dada and Futurism. Video art, the use of video technology as an artistic medium, emerging in the 1960s and 1970s with artists like Nam June Paik and Bruce Nauman. Video art can encompass projections, installations, and single-channel works, exploring narrative, conceptual ideas, and the nature of the medium itself. Digital art made or presented using digital technologies, including computer graphics, generative art created using algorithms, net art existing online, interactive art, virtual reality (VR), and augmented reality (Arkansas). These forms often blur the lines between artist, artwork, and audience, allowing for new modes of creation and interaction. The impact of globalization and the Internet. Globalization and the Internet have profoundly reshaped contemporary art creation, dissemination, and reception. Creation, artists have unprecedented access to diverse cultural influences, materials, and collaborators worldwide. Digital tools facilitate new forms of creation and hybrid styles that blend local traditions with global trends. Dissemination, the Internet, websites, social media like Instagram and TikTok, online galleries, has democratized the sharing and selling of art, allowing artists to bypass traditional gatekeepers and reach global audiences directly. Cultural exchange, increased interconnectedness fosters cross-cultural dialogue and the emergence of global art movements. For example, surrealism, pop art, conceptual art spread globally and were adapted to local contexts. However, it also raises concerns about cultural homogenization and the appropriation of indigenous art forms. Global art market. The art market has become increasingly globalized, with international art fairs, for example, Art Basel, Frieze, biennials, major galleries, auction houses, Sotheby's, Christie's, and online platforms, for example, Artsy, Ocula, playing crucial roles in shaping trends, launching artist careers, and facilitating sales across borders. The evolving role of the artist in contemporary society. The contemporary artist often embodies multiple roles beyond that of a traditional maker of objects. Activist. Many artists use their work to engage with pressing social and political issues, such as identity, gender, race, environmental concerns, and human rights, aiming to provoke thought, spark dialogue, and effect change. Artists like Anna Mendieta, feminism, displacement, Jean-Michel Basquiat, racism, class struggle, and Keith Haring, AIDS awareness, equality, exemplify this. Entrepreneur. Artists increasingly navigate the complexities of the art market, manage their careers, and sometimes create their own platforms for exhibition and sale. For example, Damien Hirst organizing the Frieze exhibition. Celebrity. Some contemporary artists achieve significant public recognition and media attention, becoming cultural figures whose influence extends beyond the art world. For example, Andy Warhol, the young British artist. Cultural commentator. Artists often act as critical observers and commentators on contemporary society, culture, and technology, reflecting and shaping our understanding of the world. This multifaceted role reflects art's deep engagement with the complexities of modern life and its potential to act as a transformative force. Art appreciation, skepticism, and the role of institutions in the digital age. Engaging with diverse and often challenging contemporary art forms requires curiosity, an open mind, and an understanding of historical and cultural contexts. Art education, criticism, and public discourse play vital roles in fostering this understanding. However, skepticism towards new and experimental art is not a new phenomenon. Historical movements from the Renaissance to Impressionism often faced initial resistance and controversy. In the contemporary art world, the lack of universally accepted criteria for judging innovation, particularly in abstract or conceptual art, can lead to public bewilderment or dismissal. Museums and galleries in the 21st century are adapting to the digital age by digitizing collections for online access. For example, the Louvre, creating virtual exhibitions and immersive VR/Arkansas experiences, and using interactive installations to engage audiences in new ways. They are also exploring technologies like blockchain for digital art and NFTs, and leveraging social media to connect with younger, digital-first audiences. These institutions are evolving from mere repositories of objects to curators of experiences, fostering dialogue and co-creation in a hybrid physical-digital art world. The evolution of art collecting practices, from ancient treasuries and Renaissance patrons to modern museums and global contemporary collectors, reflects changing societal values and the increasing accessibility and commodification of art. The journey of artistic expression from the primal marks and caves to the complex, technologically mediated forms of today is a testament to humanity's enduring need to create, communicate, and make meaning. Each era, with its unique discoveries, tools, and societal structures, has shaped not only what art looks like but also what it does, who creates it, and who experiences it. Part V, The Algorithmic Muse, Art in the Age of Artificial Intelligence, and the Return to the Gods. The trajectory of human artistic expression, having journeyed from communal ritual to individual genius, and from sacred representation to secular critique, now stands at another profound threshold. The advent of artificial intelligence, AI, capable of generating art challenges fundamental notions of creativity, authorship, and the very nature of art itself. This development, perceived by some as a democratization of creative power and by others as a potential dilution of human agency, prompts a re-examination of art's past and a speculative gaze into its future, echoing the user's poignant phrase, "Now it's back in the hands of gods." 13. The algorithmic brush, AI, generative art, and new media futures. The 21st century is witnessing an explosion of new artistic forms driven by rapid technological advancements. AI-generated art, generative art, virtual reality, VR, augmented reality, Arkansas, and other new media are not just novel tools, but are actively reshaping the landscape of artistic expression, interaction, and experience. AI-generated art and generative art, AI algorithms, particularly generative adversarial networks, GANs, and large language models, LLMs, trained on vast datasets of existing images and texts, can now produce novel visual artworks, music, and literature from textual prompts. This prompt-based generative AI can create entirely new styles, fuse diverse artistic traditions, and reinterpret established techniques. Artists are increasingly collaborating with AI, using it as a brainstorming assistant, a tool for complex execution, or even as a creative partner, leading to hybrid art forms. Virtual reality, VR, and augmented reality, Arkansas, art, VR and Arkansas technologies are transforming how art is experienced, moving beyond passive observation to immersive interaction. VR can transport viewers into entirely digital environments, allowing them to engage with artworks in novel ways, while Arkansas overlays digital elements onto the real world, creating blended experiences. Museums and galleries are adopting these technologies to enhance visitor engagement and create new forms of exhibition. Interactive installations and new media, contemporary artists are increasingly creating interactive installations that respond to viewer presence or input, often incorporating sensors, digital projections, and other technologies. This blurs the lines between artwork and audience, making the viewer an active participant in the artistic experience. The category of new media art is broad, encompassing any art form that utilizes emerging technologies. These technological advancements are fostering an increase in experimental art, the development of novel forms and styles, and the blurring of traditional artistic boundaries. The future of art is likely to be characterized by even greater human-AI collaboration, more immersive and interactive experiences, and a continued blending of physical and digital realms. 14. The democratization of creativity versus the death of the artist. The rise of accessible digital tools and AI art generators has sparked a significant debate about the democratization of art. Proponents argue that these technologies empower individuals who lack formal training or expensive materials to express their creativity, breaking down traditional barriers to art creation. Platforms like Instagram, DeviantArt, and YouTube allow novice artists to share their work with global audiences, bypassing traditional gatekeepers like galleries and museums. AI tools can act as powerful extensions of an artist's capabilities, automating tedious tasks and opening new creative horizons. However, this democratization is met with apprehension and criticism. Concerns are raised about the potential devaluation of human skill and the death of the artist, in a more literal sense than Roland Barthes' theoretical concept. If AI can generate aesthetically pleasing, or even complex artworks with minimal human input, what becomes of the human artist's role, livelihood, and unique creative agency? Some artists and critics argue that AI-generated art, being based on algorithms and existing data, lacks the emotional depth, intentionality, error, limitation, and lived experience that characterize human creativity. The fear is that human labor becomes